But so let me begin in the way that we normally do in our very traditional fashion. You know, in Kiribati we always bless each other before we begin. As we meet, we bless each other. And I also take the opportunity to acknowledge the people and the spirits of this land and seek their permission to be here and to engage and to interact with all of you and all of those around. So let me bless you, and I would ask you to bless me back, because everything is shared. And so what I would say is, come the Maori, meaning may you be blessed. And all I ask you is to respond by saying Maori. Okay? So let me bless you. Come the Maori. Thank you. And so having blessed each other, we can now proceed. And I think the film is a very short one, but I think, let me go back a little bit to the story. And the story goes back quite a number of years when I first came into office. And one of the first things that I started reading was the IPCC report. And of course, in the course of my tenure in office, the fourth assessment report came out. And in my view, that was very conclusive. I mean, the projections of that report and the conclusions were, to me, very clear. We have a serious challenge ahead of us. And so it consumed me. And I tried to communicate this to the international community. And I think for the first time I was voicing it at the General Assembly, but nobody listened. I was so focused on terrorism. And so there was a time I said, maybe we should put something together that might attract attention. So what about eco-terrorism? Still didn't help. But I think that was the state of the international attention at the time. It didn't really, the reports were coming out, but nobody really was focused on it. And if there was any focus, it was more on on other things like the polar bear. And I remember that I read this article in National Geographic. There was so much attention being focused on the polar bear, about what's going to happen as a result of climate change, global warming, how the polar bears would lose their habitat. And so I said, in the UN, I said, I read this report, and there's been never any mention of people like us in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, what the implications of climate change would be. But it's a clear indication of the priority being given, okay? And the focus. And I think it was a bit sobering. And I think the Secretary General at the time began to listen to me. And I did manage to convince him to visit Kiribati in 2011. And which he did visit. So I said, come down, have a look around. And he did. Came back in the evening, and so, please. And so, in the evening, he came back. I said, so what did you see? Now, not only do I understand what you've been talking about over the years, but I feel. And so, and he promised, I will do everything in my power to do something. And he did. Kept talking about his visit to Kiribati. But one thing he never spoke about was the fact that throughout his visit in Kiribati, the security people were always walking around with a life jacket. And because in Kiribati, when you're standing, you're always eye level with the sea. Because that's how low the islands are, barely 2 meters above sea level. Very narrow strips of land, and therefore extremely vulnerable. I think the lucky thing about it is we're on the equator mostly. And so we don't have the storms that our neighbors to the south of us do. And I'm sure you know this, storms are created on the equator. And so we send it down as our presents to our friends in Fiji and Vanuatu. But we're not supposed to get the storms, but we did. In 2014, we did. Cyclone Pam, which devastated Vanuatu. I was in Japan talking about disaster and risk reduction, risk management, and the storm hit. And so our southern islands, all of the islands of Tuvalu were flooded. And the mothers and grandmothers were running around, looking for their grandchildren. And there are a lot of interesting stories. People putting kids in the cooler box, in the bucket, just trying to survive the moment. Of course, then our southern islands were also like that, and the rest of the islands were flooded. And so what happened to the rest was the seawater overtopped the island, contaminated the waterlands, killed a lot of food crops, which had been there for as long as I lived. And so all of this was happening. So the question that I'm often asked by the media is, do you see the sea level rise? And I say, no. I don't want to lie to you. I don't see the sea level rise. But what I see are the impacts of what's happening. And these are things that we didn't experience in the past. And so we see villages going, we see the freshwater ponds being breached, and what was freshwater where food crops were cultivated is no longer. But what's worse is that it will contaminate the waterlands, and there are communities, especially on the more isolated islands. Those communities, I believe, will not be able to continue to live there in the years ahead, not in the decades, in the years ahead. So it's all of this. So I know there's a lot of controversy. Politics of climate change is perhaps one of the most interesting things. And I've been absorbing all of this over the years with the changes of government in Australia, in New Zealand, and of course here in the United States. And with the change of government, you get a change of policy. And there was a time when you get such strong support. And then it's a change of government and it's a reverse. And it's highly frustrating. But I've been sitting there with leaders from Australia and New Zealand, and we were sitting in front of the media just before leading up to the Paris discussions. And here we were, the most vulnerable Pacific Island countries, trying to consolidate our position for Paris. But our two friends, they're trying to water it down because it doesn't, they were concerned about what we were asking for. And because as the most vulnerable countries, we were saying, 2 degrees is still far too high. We want to go for below 1.5. So that was a big argument. Nobody knows about it because we're in closed session. Only the leaders were there. So they don't know when we fight. But there was a fight. I remember I can quote him, he's out of office anyway, so I'm not. The Prime Minister of Australia getting and said, come on, I eventually said, shut up. Said, don't go there. Because we're trying to get some semblance of an agreement coming out of this meeting, but if you go there, we're going to mess up. And so we came away very unhappy, so we agreed on something between 2 to 1.5. But I remember the press conference straight after that. And here they were sitting, and I was sitting. I was the only Pacific leader. The chair was there. And these two guys were so comfortable in talking about 2 degrees. 2 degrees would destroy it would be, not destroy, would affect our rates of economic growth, the farming in New Zealand. I said, and of course the media are always focusing on this, so I said, can I comment on what my 2 friends have just said? I hear them, I understand where they're coming from. But they must also hear me and listen to what I'm saying. 2 degrees is not about maintaining our living standards. It's about surviving. And so I leave that for you to make the comparison. But like everything else, it was all manipulated. The media, they love it when there's a fight between leaders. All the hands shot up to ask further questions, but of course it was all orchestrated. No more questions. But I think this is what the point that I want to make here is climate change is not a political issue. It may be partly an economic issue, but I don't believe that. I think it's first and foremost a moral issue. And it's about people understanding and knowing that what they do will help people somewhere else. And the question is, do they have the moral conscience to stop doing what they're doing? Or are they going to keep doing it because it is good? It is good for their lifestyles. But the point that I'm really making is the people, I think, have a lot more compassion than the politicians. Okay? And it's not a political issue. I always say this, and I say it again. one of the biggest obstacles is addressing the climate issue is national political leadership, because they come at it from a national perspective. And this is a global challenge. And as long as we keep coming from our individual national perspectives, we will never address it. We will never address it. Because you look at countries like, now Brazil, I understand is just recent elections, and they're saying, oh, a whole lot of things. I'm going to Australia tomorrow, and I'll be confronting the politics in Australia. We're saying all kinds of things, downplaying the latest IPCC report, and because I was there and calling for a global moratorium on the opening of new coal mines. The Australians didn't like it, the leaders didn't like it. So I'm going there again to make that second call. Already I'm being shot at, sniped at, because of an interview which I conducted. And I saw this morning, paper from Australia, that I'm already being criticized. But it doesn't matter. I love it. Because if you matter, then they'll criticize you. But if you don't matter, they won't even bother. And so, I think this is the challenge we have to face. What does climate change mean for countries like this? Well, it's very simple. Our survival is at stake. I used to believe that maybe 2030, 2050, but now it's definitely 2030. But I tell you, if we get a storm like this, or half the strength, a quarter the strength of this storm, we're gone. And I think that's what a lot of people are waiting for to happen. You know, unfortunately, we don't think that it's relevant to us. So one of the things that I've always wondered, okay, I can say this, you know, I wish, sometimes I try to talk to God and say, God, give me a sign, okay? Those who don't believe in climate change will lose all their hair. And then it becomes relevant, okay? If you don't do anything about climate change and you lose your hair, or under the threat of losing your hair, then it is relevant. But the point that I've just recently made in an interview is that, you know, it may be relevant for people or the government in Australia to think to what is happening in our part of the world, all of the problems we are facing and will face. It's irrelevant because they don't believe climate change affects them. But the reality is this. And sometimes I don't hope, but it would be good to see a huge bushfire in Australia, which will burn all of these people who don't believe, just to make the point. Because they're going to get huge bushfires. You just had it in your West Coast. And they're going to get it. And I tell you, those people who lose their homes, those people who lose their lives, those people whose farms will suffer as a result of the prolonged drought, it is relevant. Those people who have a moral conscience, it is relevant. So the point that I'm making is I won't bother to talk to political leaders. I want to talk to them so they can elect the leadership who has the moral caliber to do the right thing, who has the vision to see beyond the next election. I always say politicians only understand them, or only look to the next election. They don't care about the next generation. And that is the problem. Okay. So, the challenge that I want to share with you is I've been struggling, trying to find solutions. And I have always said, Paris would never address our problem. We have to do it alone. And the solution, just the challenge is, how are we going to survive the impacts of climate change, the projected rise in sea level? And that film is much longer, and it shows crazy ideas about floating islands, okay, which I've been discussing with different people, raising the island, even migration. And on the issue of migration, I know a number of my colleagues in the Pacific, they rejected the notion initially because it's undignified. You know, to leave one's home is undignified. And so I had to find some kind of dignity in this highly undignified event. And so I said, come on, let's do it with dignity. So let's adopt a policy of migration with dignity. And I won't talk too much about it because I'm talking about it tomorrow. But it's about looking at it in a proactive manner. Okay, we know it's coming. Let's not repeat the mistake that happened from North Africa to Europe, because that is undignified. And why? Because we knew it was coming, but we continued to deny that it was coming. We continued to push it away. We didn't embrace it and do it in a better manner. That is the problem. But I think this very country is a nation of people who migrated to seek dignity. That's what it is. So that is the point that I'm trying to make. And so the challenge is, when you think of a way of building the islands, because I've been looking around for a solution. I've been talking with all kinds of people. I had a session in my old university in New Zealand with Engineers Without Borders, and they said, oh, we're willing to do that. But unfortunately, I've not been able to follow up because I'm much too busy talking. Maybe I should stop talking and do some more concrete work. This is why I'm talking to you, because I don't have the skill sets to do that. I cannot put together the package. But once you can give me a package, I guarantee you I can go and sell it. And some of the example of what I try to do is, I work with the United Arab Emirates because they had done it. And because they were receptive to the idea. And so they were very positive. They sent engineers to come out and they did a thorough study. There is a study, I haven't seen it because I left office and the present government was in opposition when I was there, and will not share the report with me because they dispute a lot of what I'm saying. And so again, it's politics throwing a spanner in the whole works. And so I'd like to leave you with a big challenge. You know, can you come up with innovative, crazy ideas as to how to survive? You know, I've been crazy enough to think about floating islands, and but I know the islands have been built in Dubai. The islands have recently been built in the South China Sea, so it's possible. But the question is, can we do it? Can we build sufficient climate resilience? I believe so. It's a question of being innovative enough. And I will sometimes, in my moments of despair, I say, forget about it. But I cannot, because I've got a lot of grandchildren. So it's real. For me, it's a real challenge. And we cannot all migrate. And the reality is, we don't want to migrate if we can help it. So, what are the options? Can we extend the options? So that is the challenge. We can discuss the details as to how, but I want crazy young people like you to come up with brilliant ideas. So let me stop there, and then maybe we can have that interaction. Thank you very much.